Hello, I'm Ken Harris, and I'm going to show you how to do a very simple little seascape today. The tools I'm using, I have the main painting brush is about 1.5 centimetres wide. I have a medium size and small size knife, and a half worn out detail brush and a normal one, plus a fan brush. I'm going to take a little white and a little bit of red, tiny bit of red, and a tiny, just the smallest speck of orange. And I've got a little bit left over there, I'll use that as well. And that's a sort of a pink that is swinging slightly towards apricot. Now the board itself has been given a thin coat of oil, and I'm going to start at the bottom of the board with the pink. I feel that I need just the tiniest speck more of red in this. When you get it on the board and you spread it very thin, it reduces in tonal value. That's much better. It reduces in tonal value, and it's hard to see. It would be very hard to see through the camera. I'm going to just run that across here very thin. A lot of people get their toes in a real tangle when they run out of paint, and that is probably the best thing that could ever happen in actual fact, because when you mix up another lot of paint, it's difficult to get it exactly the same tonal value, and you need variations in tonal value within your painting. It certainly improves the final outlook. A bit of white and blue. This is phthalo blue that I'm using here. You could use ultramarine, you could use any number of blues. I'm just going to wipe the worst of the paint out of that brush, and tiny bit of medium, and start at the top, and a slight crisscross stroke is a way to do it. I mean, you can paint it as if you're painting a house, and it looks quite monotonous if you do that, but a slight crisscross stroke, and then when you've got the painting hanging in your lounge room or wherever, you get a little bit of light reflecting off those strokes running at all different angles, and it makes it look quite attractive, rather than the stroke just running straight across or vertically. Some people paint skies in vertically, and there's certainly no problem with that. In fact, there are some artists that believe they should only be painted in vertically, and there could be good reason to think that way. After all, the skies are disappearing over the horizon line, and you're sort of following the lines of perspective, particularly with cloud formations, if you have it running, if you have your strokes vertical. Now, I'm going to just darken the top of the sky, the corners, just a little bit. We'll just get a tiny bit more there. Pick that up, pure. It's a little bit of pure blue, and I'm running that into the corners to just darken the corners and push the viewer's vision into your painting. And we don't want to get this shading absolutely squeaky clean. It doesn't matter if you have a little bit of paint that is not blended away. It will certainly take on the characteristics of an oil painting if you have a few little strokes that are not blended away entirely. And you'll see that quite often in some of these paintings, even very famous paintings. You can see brush marks quite clearly. Gently, gently brush that away down into the blue. Now I'm going to wash the brush because I want to go back to the pink again, And when you do wash the brush, very important to get the terps out of it. I'm going to pick up a bit of that pink and I'm going to run some clouds up here. Now just bear in mind we're going to have trees over here. I'm going to run in some coconut trees. Just fuse this guy away a little more. Now when you run these clouds in, it's advisable to get them brushed away at the bottom so that you can, if you want to, bring in another bank of clouds underneath. You can give them a little bit of a windswept effect too if you want to, by just stroking them away slightly at the top. But that's about all we need. While I've got that pinkish colour on the brush, I'm going to run this little bit of sand in here, which comes around here and it disappears over here, and then we've got a little bit of a headland coming up here. So we've got sand in this area here. I'm going to pick up a little white and run that in. You notice that the paint is running in effortlessly, and it's only because I've put a little bit of medium on the board, very thin coat of medium on the board before I start it. It works wonders, believe me. I'm going to just wash that brush again. You could do the water. I'm going to run the water in now, and I want it a little bit darker, but you could run that in while you still have the blue on the brush from the sky. And the water's going to run in across here, up to this headland, and a lot of people, this is something that a lot of people have a lot of trouble with, getting the horizon line reasonably straight. Don't worry about trying to get it too straight, because I've had people, they gradually creep their horizon line up the board trying to get it straight, and they've almost had to ask me for another board. They get the horizon line so high. So just be satisfied with it reasonably straight. It does pay to have, if you're going to have a curve in it, to have it slightly coming up, of course, but really doesn't matter. A little bit of radiant green and white in here, and then I'm going back to a little blue. And I'm going to creep it up against that yellow ochre and white that I put in there. Just gently, gently run that in there. And that's about all we need. I have a bit of a dip in the horizon, but it doesn't matter. It's about what we want. Now, we need some foliage on the right-hand side of the painting where these trees are going to go. And we need some background foliage behind the trees. So I'm going to lift this green up and put it up the top of the palette. We may use it again, unlikely. And the blue, put that up the top there. People say to me, how do you lift that paint up so cleanly? Well, it's only because the knife is very, very sharp and it's picking it up. I'm going to take some orange and a little Payne's grey and make a really deep green. Could be just a tiny bit darker. Now, you'll get this green if you use orange and Payne's grey, and providing it's the Rowney brand. I'm using Dale Rowney paint, and the Payne's grey has a percentage of blue in it, and the orange, of course, has a considerable amount of yellow in it, so you get this nice green. And it's a really deep green because the orange also has red in it, and the Payne's grey has black in it also. So it's an excellent way to get a nice deep green. I'm going to run a little bit of burnt sienna throughout it, just sparingly, and I'm going to highlight it with a little bit of yellow green. just a tiny bit there. We'll come back and get that headland shortly. Now, we need some trunks run up for the coconut trees, and well, you could use a combination of burnt sienna and the green. So I'm going to run one trunk up here, another one perhaps about here, and another guy about here. Now, if you're going to run it out of the foliage, as I'm doing with these two here, then take a little bit of highlighting material and just put that around the base of the tree, and it gives the impression that the tree is coming through this vegetation. The headland here, could have done that before we ran those trunks, of course, but very easy to run it in. A little bit of a headland there, and there's a little island over here that comes down into the water. A little bit of burnt sienna with that. We could just shade it a little bit. Now, because I'm going to run a few small waves in here, you're not going to get much in the way of reflection, but you will get a little bit of shadow in the water. Just run a few rocks along the bottom there and pull away a little bit of shadow underneath it. Bear in mind that it's shadow, not necessarily a clear-cut reflection. You could just lighten it up a little more by putting a little green, a little bit of vegetation on it. And we're all ready now for the trees and the foliage on the trees. I'm going to mix up just a little more of that paint. That was orange and Payne's grey. Now, when you put the foliage on palm trees, it pays you to have the foliage. If you go to at all, then it's much better to have it too dark than too light. So we'll just run a branch, a frond in like so. Now, I feel that it could be a tiny bit darker. Much better to have it too dark. You can over highlight it if it's too dark. You can't do that if it's too light. Much better. And this guy here, they go in beautifully without any hassle at all. Well, we're going to go to a break, and after the break we'll come back and finish these trees off. So that'll give you a few minutes to catch up, and you'll be all ready to go when we come back. So I'll see you after the break. Thank you. Hello folks, I hope you've caught up and ready to go. I'm going to just run another palm tree up about here. Incidentally, when you run these palm trees in, coconut trees, whatever you want to call them, try and get the trunk coming up vertically. Don't try and put the head of the tree on a horizontal trunk. You'll notice in reality with these things that the very last little bit of the tree is coming up. It may not look it on a lot of them. You see in these travelogues and so on, it looks as if the tree is perfectly horizontal all the way, but in actual fact it'll often have just a little bend at the end of it. Now, we could put another one in somewhere here. There's no trunk being run as yet, but I personally find that placing the foliage in the position that you want it is very important. Now, I'm just going to wipe the worst of the paint off this brush, and it's really clogged up, and pick up a little bit of burnt sienna and indicate that there's a couple of dead fronds underneath the tree, and the same here. And I'm going to highlight the extreme edges with a little bit of yellow green. And up here on this guy. For some reason, a lot of people have a lot of trouble doing these trees, and I think that a lot of the problem is the fact that they hang onto the brush like as if it's a javelin they're charging the enemy with, and they get very definite, hard, sharp lines. Just relax when you're running these leaves, when you're running the fronds in, because it really is very easy to do, but it may take a little bit of practice, and it takes very little practice. I'm just going to darken that a little more in there on this guy. If you look at the foliage on these trees, it is very dense within the centre of them. And I'm going to pick up a little bit of yellow. This is, I normally use lemon yellow to just highlight tiny bits on trees like this, but I thought I'd try cad yellow, and this is cad yellow, and well, it's ideal. That's coming up like $1 million. Again, we need a little bit of vegetation here where the trunk is coming through the foliage. Now, we need to run the ripples in the front of the water here, and I'm going to take a little bit of white, and I'm going to flatten it. Just make it nice and flat, and I'm going to roll the knife over and load the edge of the knife. It's on the bottom right hand side. And when I put the knife on the board, I'm going to hold the knife out. I haven't got it flat. I'm holding it out deliberately, and I'm going to move it backwards and forwards and bring it down the board at the same time and travel across the board, obviously, as I'm going. And you get these unbelievably easy ripples to do. Load the bottom right hand side, roll the knife over as you go, move it backwards and forwards and track across the board like so. And I think with a little bit of practice you'll be over the moon with that. Now we do need a little bit of agitation in the water, and again I'm going to wash the brush because we want fairly clean white paint, and I'm only going to put the tiniest bit of agitation in the water. Don't go and put big waves way in the distance because it will throw the background up towards you. You only need the slightest, tiniest little waves in the distance, and it will make them look distant if you keep them small. If you go and make big waves in the distance, it will destroy your painting. If you want large waves, this is not really the painting for large waves, but if you want large waves, then you should put them in the foreground, not the background. However, if you go down the beach and you look out over a vast area of water, you can see the water way in the distance undulating, not necessarily breaking and foam on top. However, if it was rough enough, there would be. But you can certainly see undulations in the water. Now, I'm going to run a little bit of vegetation around the bottom of this bush outcrop we have here, and I want to get it nice and dark. We could actually go to a tiny little bit of burnt umber in this corner, and if you wanted to put a little bit of water that may have sort of overflowed the sandbank there or the bank itself, you could run a tiny bit of water in, maybe about here, and we need to run a little bit of grass or something around that. Just creep along the outside edge. If it's calm, and it would be, then you can run a little bit of reflection, but it's only very small anyway. Run this grass. A lot of this grass that you see growing in beach areas has a bluey tinge about it, and I've just put a tiny bit of blue in that stuff there, and that's about the shade of it. Creep a little more in along there, and that's a great painting to have a go at and get the kids into. You could, if you wanted to, put a few rocks in here. These are purely and simply fillers. That's all, just to fill the painting. You put another one in here if you want to. We could highlight it with a little bit of that pink. That'll stand out against it. And this guy here, a little bit in here. And of course, to make the thing look as if, the rocks look as if they've been there for a great length of time, you need to get just a little bit of grass. You need to get rid of that bottom sharp edge. All right, well, I think that's about all we need. There's just one or two things that I feel could be pushed a little more, and that is we could get a little more highlight on some of these clouds here. We've got a bit of pink paint over. We can get a little more in the way of highlighting those clouds. But apart from that, I think it's a wonderful exercise for you or your kids to have a go at, particularly during school holidays when they can relax and get into it. I'm going to sign it down here in the bottom right hand corner. And I'm going to run a frame around it and see how it looks. Well, I feel that's come up like $1 million, and get your brushes out and have a go. Remember, the first brush stroke's always the hardest, and the last brush stroke is always the most satisfying. So have a go. If you've got problems, give me a bell. Thank you. Bye.